Welcome to NGA Art Talk, a podcast offering you a deeper understanding of all things artistic, including talks with artists, curators, conservators, and collectors. In this two-part podcast, National Gallery of Art Senior Curator Franklin Kelly and Tate Museum in London Curator Ian Worrell discuss the life and works of J.W. Turner. In the first episode, they talk about Turner's use of sketchbooks and observation, his dramatic series of works depicting the burning of the Houses of Parliament, and his modernistic aesthetic.
It's an intriguing challenge to talk about Turner and the incredible range of his output and the incredible variety of his techniques and his methods. And I think one of the interesting starting points, because the exhibition does offer both large-scale, highly finished studio productions, small-scale, in some cases, sketches, watercolors, oil sketches, unfinished paintings, might be a very interesting point to start thinking about and discussing how did he make things. And for instance, did he work in the field, out of doors, and if so, what were his preferred media?
For Turner, right from the beginning of his career, using a sketchbook actually in a specific place and recording those details, that direct engagement with a setting was something that underpins all his art, right from the 1780s when he was in his teens, right through to the 1840s when he was in his 60s. There's always this close observation of settings, trying to get under the skin. And when you look through his sketchbooks, you see how he'll actually stalk a subject. He'll move around and around until he's found exactly the viewpoint he wants. More so in the later sketchbooks, particularly where he was able to sketch with such a fluency and such an amazing kind of shorthand that was personal to himself. Whereas in the early books, he was more economic with his paper, so he wanted to make sure he got the right viewpoint before he started. And he would be very detailed in the amount of information he would record on his paper. But later on, he's just all the time got this kind of omnivorous interest in the world and just wants to see as much as he can. It's not just the views he's recording. He will sketch figures he sees, people at work, costumes, strange things in the landscape, particular architectural features. So he's always observing and trying to assimilate that information. And it's amazing how much, when you go back to compare a finished watercolor with the preliminary sketch, how much information there is that was obviously stored in Turner's brain rather than actually on the paper.
I'm going to ask you that because when I see the sketchbooks, I marvel. They're quick, and he seemed to be able of working quite rapidly, as you say, moving around a subject. But the translation between the quick, say, pencil study and even a beginning watercolor, obviously he had a tremendous visual memory for color and for effect of atmosphere and any number of things.
He does record quite sort of specifically some sunsets and things like that where he'll use a shorthand.
Yes.
And there's one sketchbook, a marvellous sketchbook he used around 1819, just before he goes to Italy for the first time, where he filled the whole sketchbook with studies of the sky, page after page, where he's recording different cloud formations, the change in the sunset from moment to moment, which is actually a real revelation to turn the pages. It's almost kind of a flick book, really, of a sunset. Now,
one of the things that going and observing and being a person who is out there and gathering material from the real world puts Turner often in the sort of the position of a kind of visual reporter in some cases. And we have in the exhibition one of the great moments in the exhibition is a single gallery devoted to the subject of the burning of the Houses of Lords and Commons, and which Turner did witness in 1834. And in that gallery, there are 2 finished oil paintings, 9 watercolor studies, and then 2 other related watercolors. Tell us a little bit about what do you think happened in the sequence that led to those extraordinary works?
Well, this is the first time all of that material has been brought together anywhere. I mean, the most anyone's seen of those all together was at Tate Britain we only had 1 of the oil paintings and 5 watercolors, so it's quite a stage further from that, and it gives us an amazing opportunity to reconsider whether Turner may have made these watercolors on the spot, which is an idea people had. And he obviously worked with tremendous passion on them because the back of each sheet is blotted, and so he was working quickly. The paint wasn't dry while he was moving on to the next sheet to set down the colours, and that may indicate that he was working on the spot, but I think it's unlikely given the number of people that were there that evening, and Turner was obviously darting around backwards and forwards from one side of the river to the other to be able to see the events from Palace Yard right close to the fire, and as well as retreating along and down the Thames to look back on the incident and see how amazing the scale of the fire was.
And those watercolors, the 9 ones from presumably the sketchbook that he worked on back in the studio, if that's what it was, they really don't focus on anything but color, do they? I mean, it's cool and warm colors, and he's not worried about details of I mean, sometimes you can see just a kind of sketchy indication of the building, but it's really about color and atmosphere.
Yeah, I mean, if once your eye is adjusted to Turner's shorthand, you can recognise perhaps the towers of Westminster Abbey, but it is very vague, and the only other feature you might see is Westminster Hall, but there's not enough information there. It was really for Turner to recreate or visualise, in a sense, for himself what the fire looked like and what it meant, really. He was trying to put that kind of emotional element into the pictures and setting that out in this series of watercolours.
Now, one of the things that gets very interesting, of course, and has been interesting for a long time since the advent of modernist painting in the 20th century is, of course, looking retrospectively through the history of art back to Turner's time with the knowledge of what happens in especially mid-20th century painting. Those watercolor studies are very, very appealingly abstract and have been admired for those reasons and you know, of course, justifiably so if that's how one wants to approach them. One of the things I think is interesting, though, is that process, the actual, when we get to see Turner's process in the preliminary studies, it also makes us aware of how the artistic process is part of the finished painting as well, and we sense him making and creating with paint. And that is a very kind of modernist aesthetic, and that certainly reaches a very remarkable crescendo in the great painting of the steamer in the snowstorm off a harbor's mouth.
Yeah, I completely agree with the idea that there is a kind of modern instinct in Turner to make you engage with the surface of the canvas as much as what the image is. And that's something that he's doing right from the early stages of his career. If you look at the shipwreck in the second gallery of the exhibition, that the surface of that is made up. Well, in fact, the critics of the day said it looked like it was painted with plaster. They just thought it was so extraordinary that he would disrupt the image to an extent so that you would focus on the paint rather than, you know, individual details. And it was very broadly painted. And another one in that gallery, the Falls of Schaffhausen, similarly has these areas where it's almost like late Titian, where he's just indicated things in such a general way. And so he very consciously made that decision at an early stage. It's not something that happens as a kind of looking forward to modernism in just in the late unfinished things. It's always there as a characteristic of his work. But in the picture like the late snowstorm, what I think he's trying to do is really draw you into the sensations of the storm. So trying to recreate that on canvas itself. And I think that does help tally up with these myths that have grown up around the picture, the idea that Turner might have been strapped to the mast